On BBC London, the share scandal surrounding the Mayor's key financial advisor on the 2012 Olympics. And plans to store fuel again at the Buncefield oil depot are condemned as arrogant.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's news at 6 o'clock. The man who once boasted that he planned the 9/11 terror attacks from A to Z stood in front of some of the victims' relatives for the first time today. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 4 others have appeared before a military tribunal at Guantanamo Bay. The men say they will plead guilty to the murder of nearly 3,000 people, as Jonathan Beale now reports from Guantanamo Bay.
Relatives of 5 victims of the attacks on 9/11 arrived at Guantanamo Bay, flown in by the US military. This would be the first time they'd see the faces of the men accused of planning the attacks, including the alleged mastermind of the plot, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's been described as one of history's most infamous terrorists. According to the transcripts released by the Pentagon, the self-proclaimed head of Al-Qaeda's military committee has admitted to responsibility for the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center in New York, the Bali bombings in 2002, and the organization and execution of 9/11. Nearly 3,000 people were killed when hijackers flew passenger planes into New York's Twin Towers and the Pentagon. Among those killed, Mark Bingham on flight United 93.
I heard Mark's voice and, "Mom, this is Mark Bingham. I'm on a flight from Newark to San Francisco. There are 3 guys on board who've taken over the plane. They say they have a bomb. You believe me, don't you, Mom?"
Today, Mark's mother was among the relatives who saw Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in the flesh. They were sitting in court just a few meters behind the man who's already claimed responsibility for 9/11, shielded from the media by a curtain.
You would really have to be a bloodthirsty and inhuman person to hatch such a plot. That's one reason I'm going to be glad if I can sit in the same room with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and sort of take the measure of that man.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed told the military judge that he wanted to enter a plea confessing to planning the attacks. He dismissed his military defense lawyer, adding, "I don't trust any Americans, whether the judge or the CIA who tortured me." What happens next is far from certain. President-elect Barack Obama has promised to close down Guantanamo Bay. He's also criticized the whole trials process. But the families of the victims of 9/11 are still waiting for justice.
Well, a short time ago, before we came on air, I spoke to Jonathan at Guantanamo Bay and I asked him about the atmosphere in court.
Well, yeah, extraordinary. This courtroom, highly guarded, which I can't show you for security reasons, just a few meters away from where I am now. The first time the families have seen face-to-face Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the man accused of masterminding the attacks on 9/11. Now, we couldn't see their faces because they were shielded by a blue curtain. They may speak to us later on, but what they heard from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was a message of defiance, essentially, saying that he wanted to give a guilty plea, that he was going to confess to the attacks, to being behind the attacks on 9/11. I think the atmosphere here is extraordinary because although there's plenty of questions about what happens to these trials process, whether they're fair, having the relatives here, having them hear what Khalid Sheikh Mohammed said is only going to add the political pressure on President-elect Barack Obama when he comes into office to make sure that justice is done.
Well, you mentioned President Obama there. Hasn't he said he wants to end Guantanamo anyway?
Well, he's had a very clear message that he wants to close down the detention center, which is just about a mile away from where I am now, that he's criticized the whole trials process along with human rights groups. What he hasn't set out is a clear alternative. What do you do next? And to be honest, the options are fairly difficult options for Barack Obama. Does he move them to the mainland to have trials in federal courts? That would be very controversial. A lot of Americans oppose the idea of having these men who are accused of plotting the attacks on 9/11 on American soil. We've yet to hear what Barack Obama is going to do with these men, but the pressure is on for him to come up with an alternative.
That was Jonathan Beale there. Well, here, the head of Children's Services, whose department failed to protect baby P